Good morning and good evening, everybody, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome. My name is Adriana Chavarria. I am a program officer at Climate Strategies. And for those who don't know us, Climate Strategies is a research network that works at the interface between climate research and climate policy. Before we start, I just want to remind you that we are recording this event and we are hoping that we will share it publicly afterwards. So we are following Chatham House rules. Today, we're delighted to be hosting alongside our partners from the Oxford Climate Policy and Energy Systems Catapult, the final event of our project, Flexible Demand to Integrate Intermittent Renewables, which is an international cooperation project between the UK and China, and funded by the Prosperity Fund of the China Energy and Low Carbon Economy Program. We started working on this project in August 2020, last year, alongside also our partner in China, the Energy Research Institute. And later this month, we will be also publishing the final policy brief, which will be available in our website. And we will also share it with those who are attending this event today. I know some of you have already participated in the stakeholder consultations and events we had last year, but for those who have never heard about the project, we aim to learn about international experiences with demand-side flexibility, mostly in the UK, but also in other relevant countries around the world, and to learn also about Chinese markets and consumer preferences at both residential level and at industrial and commercial scale in order to inform policy design, business models, and technology innovation to unlock the potential of demand-side flexibility for the decarbonization of electricity. And I know this sounds like a lot of technical jargon probably, but what we mean by demand-side flexibility is actually the capacity of consumers or representatives on their behalf, like for example, aggregators, to modify their consumer behavior, meaning consuming more or less electricity, for example, in response to external factors, which can be, for example, prices, or it could be weather conditions, because as you know, depending on the weather, we may have more or less input from clean energy sources. And why this is important and why would consumers adapt their behaviors to that is something that we will learn from our speakers throughout the event today. One thing that I wanted to mention is that unfortunately, our project got ended before it was supposed to because of ODA cuts, which resulted on the cancellation of the Prosperity Fund China by the UK government. But our research already got us much farther than we were expecting when we started, meaning that demand-side flexibility has proven to be a novel and fast-growing sector, and it really merits further research in order to understand the true enablers and the barriers and challenges to unlock its potential. Yes, in the UK and of course in China, but also globally. So I will let our amazing speakers today to guide you through this topic. We have a very packed agenda for the day, starting with our keynote speaker, Guy Newey, Strategy and Performance Director at Energy Systems Catapult, who will give us an overview of the importance of demand-side flexibility for a country like the UK, which is a pioneer country in this sector, but also some of the challenges that still remain going forward. Then we will learn about the key findings and recommendations from the Flexible Demand to Integrate Intermittent Renewables project from our lead researchers at the Oxford Climate Policy Institute, David Robinson and Xin Li, followed by a very interesting presentation from Eugene, who is manager of the China Power team at RMI, on the prospects of demand-side flexibility in China and the key insights and priorities for the 14th five-year plan. After this, we will hear the perspectives from key demand-side flexibility stakeholders, such as aggregators and system operators. This session will include flash comments from Pierre Vivas, founder and CEO of Voltalis, Youngmi Kim, sales director at NLX China, and James Kellaway, who is Energy Intelligence Manager at National Grid ESO. We will close the event with an interactive Q&A session, for which I encourage all of you attending today the event to share your questions throughout the event using the Q&A function that you can see at the bottom of the screen. And we will try to cover as many as we can during this Q&A session. Of course, we might not be able to do so, but we will do our best. And finally, I wanted to add that we will have most of today's speakers at this Q&A, so it really will benefit from you sharing the questions throughout the whole event. We will also have George Day joining the panel of discussion on behalf of Guy Newey from Energy Systems Catapult. And we will launch a few poll questions during the event in order to kickstart the Q&A by discussing your responses to those poll questions. So before we jump into the presentations, I'm going to ask Tim, who is one of my colleagues at Climate Strategies, working at the back end of this event, to please launch the first one of those questions now. So the question reads, it's a statement: electricity consumers will never be active enough for demand-side flexibility to drive electricity decarbonization. Is this true or false? I'm gonna give you a few seconds to reply. Just to let you know, we won't share the responses until the Q&A. Just a few seconds more for that. This is very interesting. I can see a lot of responses coming in already. Oh, and I've been told that actually you might be able to see their responses already, but that's okay. We will still discuss them during the Q&A. So I think, Tim, we can close the poll now. And as I was saying, we will come back to it during the Q&A. Tim, can you close the poll now? I'll continue then. Let's keep this question now in the back of our mind to set the scene for our first speaker, Guy Newey from Energy Systems Catapult. He oversees the strategy and performance team at ESC, which deals with strategy and impact, market, policy and regulation, and stakeholder relations and communications. But he also has worked in the past as an advisor on energy and climate for the UK government and also for energy suppliers and think tanks. So a very well-rounded experience and the best case scenario for our first speaker. And without further ado, Guy, over to you.
Thanks very much, Adriana. I'm going to, whilst I talk about the huge technology challenges we're facing, my first technology challenge is obviously sharing my slides. So let me concentrate on doing that, and then hopefully we can get going. Can you see those? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Thank you, George. Great. Okay. Well, so thank you so much for the invitation to today. An extraordinarily packed agenda. The energy system is changing at an astonishing rate, and you're seeing you know, the background that we talked to you at the moment with the international gas price going absolutely crazy just makes it even more exciting and thrilling as a ride. Although I suspect there are people in the governments around the world who are probably not enjoying the ride too much at the moment. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the UK's perspective on what's changing and what that means for demand side flexibility, because it's an incredibly exciting time to be in this space, as I say. Very briefly about the Energy Systems Catapult. So we are an innovation agency based in the UK, but do work internationally. There's around 200 of us looking at various different aspects of this challenge, and there's two main things we do. One, we support innovators, both small and large, who are trying to take an opportunity of this changing energy system, and particularly around flexibility. But also, we spend a lot of time thinking about what the future system and energy markets need to look like. Partly because you spend any time talking with innovators, they're like, I've got this incredible product, I've got this great offering into the market, but the market rules are getting in the way of what's happening. And this challenge of what the future market looks like with the new technology is one that every country in the world is facing and is going to have to grapple with. And at the heart of our approach is trying to think about how the whole system fits together. So look, this is how the energy market is changing. On the left-hand side, we have, the traditional energy market, quite siloed. You've got an electricity system, you've got a heating system, you've got a transport system, and largely they kind of they've been untouched from each other. But what we are moving towards, because of the obvious need for decarbonisation, but obviously the technology that is accompanying that, particularly intermittent renewables, wind and solar in particular, the introduction of EVs, etc., is those kind of breakdown between those silos are happening. So lots of the companies we work with, you can buy your car from your energy company now, an electric vehicle which plugs into the system and needs to work in a different way. Heating is drifting towards more electricity, but there's also the rival technology of hydrogen, which of course links very closely potentially with the electricity system. All of these questions and the divisions are breaking down, as it were. And at the same time, energy is just getting serious about the potential of digital technology and what that means. So you've got these forces of decentralized technology, of decarbonisation, of more and more people involved in the energy market in terms of and the energy system, rather than kind of a limited number of players, traditionally big power stations, transferring down to kind of inflexible load. You can have much more people involved in it. And by the way, this enormous challenge of digitalisation is coming forward. And doesn't need anyone thinking about it too long to say that if you put much more kind of intermittent generation onto the system, much windier systems, much more sun-based systems, that the potential of flexibility to match that is going to be much more important. And luckily, digital technology provides lots of the tools. So in kind of market thinking terms, the kind of the shape of the duration, low duration curve is going to change. What does base load mean? It's going to be a very different question, and therefore flexibility is going to become much more important. So who's going to be the winners in that space? Well, technologies which can really think about what happens behind the meter and respond in a particular way. I don't necessarily think we're all going to become as consumers, energy traders every evening and check in on the on what's happening in the market and adopt whether we turn on our tumble dryers and washing machines appropriately. But that system, but we're going to have people doing that on our behalf and getting the system benefits as a result. And I'll talk at the end towards some of the market implications that come out from that. Just a bit of modeling that we've done. We have a load of modeling capability at the Energy Systems Catapult, looking at the UK system largely, as it's such a kind of interesting and important market. We have a model called the storage and flexibility model. And in any future system, even if you put on a lot of nuclear power or carbon capture and storage onto one end, demand side flexibility is going to be highly valuable for this system to balance off the wind and to make the wind properly integrated into the system. We'll still have some solar in the UK context, but it's not as sunny as other countries, much more windy. And as the kind of the point on the bottom right box makes, low cost behind the meter flexibility is going to be really important. And technologies which are not particularly kind of sexy, like hot water tanks, are going to be really important as kind of storage vectors working. At least the system modeling tells us that. But of course, none of that is going to happen unless you get the market design right and there are proper incentives for people to really deliver the solutions that we work with. And, you know, we at the Energy Systems Catapult and the partners we work with are really trying to grapple with lots of these issues. This is one of the huge projects we're involved with Innovate UK. Our bit of it's called the Energy Revolution Integration Service. And this project is looking at people trying to do smart, what we call smart local energy systems, kind of flexible projects in different parts of the country. Because, you know, the modeling will tell you how much value there is, but getting down to the actual detail of how these operate in the market, getting your hands dirty, understanding how your electric vehicle charging network is going to work with a wider network, understanding the potential of digital technology to turn things on and off, understanding how consumers respond is really important. And I encourage you to have a look at our website on the various different elements of that project. One of the most exciting, just to pick one out of a lot of very exciting projects, is what's happening in Oxfordshire, you know, really trying to understand how that transition can work in practice with the Super Hub project there. And we're also recognizing that, you know, back to the point I was making about how consumers are actually going to work in this market, we've also built what we call our Living Lab. This is 500 real people's homes at the moment, and we're hoping to expand it, where you can come and test different pieces of kit, and you can also design, you know, potentially design future policy and market arrangements. So if people are interested in that, please come and talk to us about it. And we are, you know, trying out with new companies, trying out actually understanding how consumers think about their particular area. And, you know, there are some incredible exciting projects with the likes of Ampex and Electron, who are really trying to do this stuff on the ground. But I will just finish with a key point, that none of this, you can get all the engineering to work, but nobody is going to invest in this on the pace and scale that we need in order for the system to work, unless our markets are designed properly. And hopefully George on the panel will get a chance to talk about this in a bit more detail. We released a piece of work about 6 months ago, looking at the potential of rethinking how electricity markets will work to unlock this potential flexibility. And as we all know, that a future energy market has got to solve a few problems. It's got to solve things that work, offerings that work for consumers, that actually the flexibility propositions are desirable. It can't, you know, we can't expect everyone to be kind of mini energy traders, as I say. We're going to need to get a huge amount of net zero energy resource onto the system, but we've got to make sure that doesn't distort markets as it's currently doing in the UK context. We've got to make sure it all works. It's got to be operable, this future system, and that needs to coordinate with the networks, and we need to make sure all the policy frameworks are coming together. And hopefully George will be able to give you a bit more detail about that. So look, in summary, the potential and the need is absolutely huge for demand side flexibility. It's one of the most exciting areas, but the challenges on the ground, we're learning from the projects we work on and the innovators we work with, are very significant. It's going to require learning, it's going to require making mistakes, it's going to require innovation. Put in simple terms, and it's going to require market reform. And one of the really interesting things about the group of people we've got speaking today is how can we learn from each other's markets. The UK was a leader in privatizing its energy markets and market reform over the last 30-40 years. Will the UK be a leader tomorrow? Because whichever country can crack this future energy system, this flexible future energy system, will be an incredible position going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guy, for this very interesting overview. And before we move on to our next speaker, we're going to launch our second poll question, which actually relates very well to what you were saying about the importance of appropriate incentives and of understanding also how consumers respond to them. So the second question, team, please go ahead. It reads, what has the greatest potential to attain consumer participation in demand-side flexibility? And we're giving you a few examples of options like economic incentives, access to technology, automation of flexibility, and information and transparency. So again, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds or so to respond to the poll question before we close it. And we will come back to the results during the Q&A as we did with the first question as well. Maybe a few seconds more, about 10, 15 seconds. Yeah, I think we can close the poll now, and we will review the results during the Q&A. Thank you very much, team. I will now hand straight over to David and Xin Li from Oxford Climate Policy, and who are also the lead researchers from our Flexible Demand to Integrate Intermittent Renewables project. In this case, they will aim to answer the question of how can consumers help to decarbonize the electricity system, and they will do so, but of course, by looking at demand-side flexibility, but also the policy implications for China. David, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Adriana. And I just want to start with the 5 main messages from the policy brief. The first one is that decarbonisation of energy requires 2 things. It needs renewables penetration, and we require electrification of end markets. So, as Guy was saying, we're talking about electrification of transport and heating in particular. Secondly, renewable generation creates the need for new sources of flexibility, whereas electrification increases the potential for demand to provide that flexibility. So they go together. The challenge, as Guy has stressed, is to actually enable that demand-side flexibility because consumers are basically fairly passive. The conclusion is that combining renewables with demand-side flexibility is a global requirement as well as a business opportunity. Could I have the next slide, please? On the left, we've got sort of a classic picture of why demand-side flexibility makes sense for the system as a whole. As essentially, it offers the opportunity to avoid large capacity investments in generation and in transmission in particular. Traditionally, this has been a matter of reducing demand at peak times, predictable peak times, and therefore not having to build capacity. But there's also the potential for demand to, if it falls at peak or at any other time, it can reduce the price in the spot market. So what we're talking about is a reduction in the capacity costs and in the energy costs. The point being that even if a small percentage of consumption is flexible in that way, it reduces the cost for the entire system so that all consumers benefit. Now, although it's always been really important, we say that it is now essential. It's essential, first of all, because renewable penetration creates new needs for flexibility. In particular, it introduces intermittency into the generation side of the business. So we need flexibility which can cope with changes in, if you want, the availability of wind and solar at any time, and it can be for shorter periods or longer periods. So we've got new kinds of flexibility requirements. Also, because almost half of the generation by 2030 is going to be on the distribution network, we need to have flexibility which is able to help manage the congestion on that network. And perhaps even more importantly, what we're talking about is that as renewables become a significant part of the generation business, the tradition of the generation side balancing the electricity system is no longer viable. We need a completely new decarbonized system of flexibility. So that's the first point. The second point is that electrification, in particular, the building of, or the penetration of new sources of distributed energy resources behind consumer meters, in particular EVs, batteries, PVs, and as Guy's been saying, smart heating systems, they become a new source of flexibility. Now, the other thing that's really important is that, as Guy was saying, digitalization allows for an aggregation of these digital devices and the ability to sell flexibility, we call it explicit demand-side flexibility, into markets, hence the importance of the market design. We've also got, because of these resources being behind consumer meters, we've got a significant potential to manage the congestion on the distribution system. So the key message here is that distribution, or I should say that demand-side flexibility will compete with the large-scale, say, storage and decarbonized generation. But if it is able to be competitive, it can help to avoid system costs. So we can have, of course, we're going to have large-scale generation and we'll need networks and so on, but we won't need as much. So as we saw in the graphic on the left, we can avoid capacity costs, but we'll also be able to avoid energy costs. Next slide, please. This is a picture from over 10 years ago, and what it does is it illustrates two things. First of all, if you look at the left-hand side, what's called business as usual, you will see that the contribution of demand-side flexibility is less than 5% of the peak demand, and almost all of it comes from large commercial and industrial consumers. If you look over on the right-hand side where everyone is participating, you'll see that it can achieve, say, demand-side flexibility can be responsible or equal to, or potentially able to avoid almost 20% of peak capacity. And that green, yellow, and blue parts of the bar imply that over 2/3 of that flexibility will come from residential consumers or from small and medium-sized commercial and industry. Now, as I say, this is an old graphic. It's actually from the US, but it's a really clear indication of the potential that there is for smaller consumers to provide demand-side flexibility, and also it sort of gives us an idea of the direction of change. So I think that the real point here is the potential is enormous, as Guy was saying, and that take me to the next slide, Shin, because we really have to ask ourselves, how does one deliver that? And I think if you speak to people who've been trying to get demand-side flexibility working for many years, they will tell you that it just doesn't work. Consumers are not willing to participate, and the truth is, of course, most consumers are passive and not interested in doing energy trading. But basically, the current system discourages demand-side flexibility, whereas the technology is now enabling it, and it's really now a matter of ensuring that policies are in place to make it possible. So here are some of the key market reforms that we see, or policy and market reforms we see being, if you want, initiated in the UK. And as Guy said, we haven't got there, but we're making progress. The first one is that the prices and the markets have to reflect the full value of demand-side flexibility. Specifically, that means that they're more granular in terms of their location, in terms of their time. The second is that demand-side flexibility has access to all markets, wholesale, balancing capacity, and other markets. And particularly, this is important for explicit demand-side flexibility by aggregators, usually, who, by having a greater volume of sales, can help to cover the costs of developing the digital platforms and other technology required in order to capture the flexibility. Third, we need regulatory incentives to ensure that the system operator has an interest in supporting demand-side flexibility when it's efficient. And this can be either through a separate system operator or regulatory incentives for that. I would also
apologies,
add,
David, you have 3 minutes left. Just
okay, thank you. I would also add that it's very important to introduce standardized standards for electrical equipment so that they can actually provide flexibility. And more generally, what we're looking at here is support for developing new technologies and business models to make demand-side flexibility easy. But finally, what's particularly important is recognizing that unless we can get and understand consumer preferences, we're never going to design markets and contracts which are going to encourage consumers to be flexible. And on that, I'm going to end and pass the baton to Eugene to talk about opportunities in China.
Yep, thanks, David. DSF can bring multiple benefits to China, including system benefits, consumer benefits, and the wider socio-economic benefits. First of all, renewable energy sources are expected to grow rapidly in order to fulfill the 2030 carbon peaking and 2060 carbon neutral targets. With the large-scale integration of renewable energy, more flexible sources are needed. So DSF offers an alternative flexible source that can be an important element to fulfill the overall flexibility needs. Because of the flexibility it provides, DSF contributes to security of supply, system stability, which are considered of paramount importance in any power system. But DSF is an emerging business opportunity that may fit well to China's plan on promoting green energy development through the Belt and Road Initiative. In addition, demand-side flexibility can offer significant benefits to consumers. Electrification of mobility, heating, and cooling will lead to increase in consumer bills. Through DSF, consumer can either reduce their energy bills and get compensation in other forms. One other important contribution by demand-side flexibility through consumer engagement is the education on issues such as climate change, power system transition, and so on. We are aware that the power market reform in China has made some progress gradually, although slowly. Since the power market has not been established fully, we think a hybrid approach is more appropriate to the Chinese context. By saying a hybrid approach, the market prices could be used to incentivize flexibility for specific assets such as EV. At the same time, the administrative merit order could be used by the aggregator or system operator to ration demand for specific equipment. Well, indeed, China has been testing all types of new energy models, such as microgrid, flexible grid, smart grid, etc. And DSF is an essential element in all these new models. As Gay said, being innovative is key in the development of DSF. Consumer aggregation to form virtual power plant, automation control of equipment, and other business approaches are necessary. But having said all above, I think it's vital to conduct experimentation on consumers, understanding their preferences in terms of equipment, tariff, level of control, comfortability, compensation needed, ease of use, so on, are key to the success of DSF. It might be a good opportunity now because of the nationwide power shortages and the strong outcry from all types of consumers, which could lead to a higher level of willingness to participate. DSF program. Therefore, the new surveys, pilots, and other forms of interaction with consumers are needed urgently. I will hand over back to David for concluding comments.
Well, I think the simple messages here are that renewables and electrification are a perfect match, that wherever there's going to be renewable penetration, and that's around the world, we're going to need DSF, but the real challenge is to realize the potential. And so we want to sort of insist once again in the need for research into understanding consumer preferences to design the policies, models, technologies to enable consumers to help decarbonize electricity and accelerate the transition. Thank you.
Thank you, David and Eugene. I would like to remind you that these insights are going to be part of the policy brief that we will publish at the end of the month, both in English and Chinese. So do keep an eye out for it. I am now delighted to introduce Eugene Liu. She is manager of the power team at RMI, which focuses on national, regional, and provincial power sector decarbonization pathways. She has also worked very closely with Chinese energy and power conglomerates and with companies throughout the power sector supply chain. Eugene will help us navigate deeper into the role and potential of demand-side flexibility in the Chinese context, and also on what it means for the China 14th Five-Year Plan. Eugene, over to you.
Thank you, Regina, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eugene, and I'm not going to introduce myself again, since we do not have much of time. So I think the purpose of my presentation today is to bring more local insights of what exactly is happening in China in terms of DFX. And actually, some of you may know that currently DFS in the China context is mainly about demand response, which was a very big topic in China in the past month due to the power supply shortage. And in last month, demand response is almost like demand shutdown, because the response or the reaction from the demand side is not driven by the market. Is mostly required by system operator or government mandatory. And also the compensation, the prices were also mostly set by the government, or even there was no compensation. So as a result, at this point of time, I think most of the people, especially those out of the power industry, still think that demand response, let's still call it demand response in this context, is more or less like a punishment instead of customer behavior due to the lack of pricing signals. So if we look at why China was lack of power in the past month, the reason could be threefold, and it's different in different provinces. But in general, people see this trend to continue in the next few years, or even in a longer time. Number one, because number one is the load is increasing very fast in most of the provinces. In some of the provinces, the load, annual peak load, even increases in double digit. And the second thing is China already announced that it will try to strictly control the new coal power investment domestically. And the other alternatives, for example, chemical storage and gas is very expensive, and nuclear and pump hydro it takes a long time to build. So basically, I think for the next 5 years, during the 14th five-year plan period, demand side flexibility will be the most efficient and effective solution to solve the system problem in China. Well, if we look at how demand response is being developed in China, especially under the ongoing power market reforms, it's easy to see that. So basically, the first message is that some provinces have already started piloting market-based DR, while the regulation-based DR has been developed in China for almost 20 years. But only some provinces have started using the markets to decide the prices for demand response. But then now one of the significant problem is that there lacks the connection between the DR mechanism and the other power mechanisms. For example, the spot market or other market mechanism. So one example is in Guangdong province in May this year. There's a very we saw that the price cap for DR was very high, and it was almost like 80 cents US. No, sorry, 70 cents US dollar per kilowatt hour. But the price cap in the spot market was only like 10 cents US dollar back then. So apparently you can see the disconnection between different market mechanisms. And this is one of the major challenges many of the system operators or their market designers that are worrying about. And this is one of the number one problems they are going to solve in the very near future. So when we talk about the pricing mechanism, let me just give you a little bit background on how is the power pricing reforms going on in China right now, to give you a little bit sense of where demand response is, like where is it now. So let's first look at the wholesale side. So China has kicked off the current power market reform 6 years ago. And it first started with the wholesale side. And although different provinces got their different plans, but in general, they are following the 5 steps that I listed here on the slide. So number one, to build a so-called mid to long energy market, basically covers everything before their head. And then they established the ancillary service market. And then step 3, they established the support market. So right now, in 2021, most of the provinces have entered step 2, and some of them have entered step 3 to build up a spot market. A lot of them are discussing about how to build a capacity market, especially given the increasing share of intermittent renewable capacity. So that's the next big issue for the system designers. And then eventually, they're talking about having a financial forward market, which we are not going to talk much about today. So and this is where the wholesale market are. Where is it today? And if we look at the retail side reforms have been very slow compared to the wholesale side, which actually becomes a bigger problem when spot market is introduced on the wholesale side. So I will explain why. So here's what it was before, or before the reforms. So on the wholesale side, there's no time difference. So as a power plant, I receive the same price whenever I sell a megawatt hour to the grid. But on the retail side, for most of the commercial and industrial power users, they do have a time of use curve, which is defined by the regulators. And right now, as we have the reform, what we are doing here is that the contracts signed in the wholesale market, they are actually sign a price differences, which will apply to both the wholesale and the retail side. So basically, you can see here, for example, if the difference is, for example, like 10 cents yuan per kilowatt hour, then this difference will be applied to both sides. But this model will not be sustainable if spot market is introduced on the wholesale side. So here's what we are facing now.
Eugene,
in the very
please start wrapping up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Could you please start wrapping up? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. So here's what we are seeing. We'll be seeing in the very near future that on the wholesale side, contracts will be break down into different time period, and they will have different prices for different time period. And on the retail side, the government has already announced that they will cancel the regulated retail tariff, but how it will be canceled is not clear, and how the retail price will be determined is not clear either. So, but one thing we are pretty sure about is that for the retailers and the grid load aggregators, they will have to come up with much more complicated or innovative and also customized solutions to retain their customers. And it means that for demand response, this is actually a very good opportunity, a very good period for them to develop this market. So at the end of the presentation, I would like to pick Shandong as an example, because I think Shandong is one of the leading pilots in terms of exploring the DR market pricing mechanism, how they can connect to other power pricing mechanisms. I'm not going to go into all the details. You're feel free to write to me, and I will send you the slides if you are interested. But in general, as you can see here, especially under the pricing mechanism block, as you can see here, Shandong has already started introducing the market mechanism instead of government set prices to determine the price level in the demand response market. And as you can see here, they are introducing unilateral bidding, and also they are also have bilateral bidding between the renewable generators and the users to determine the prices. So, okay, my last slide. Policy priorities for most provinces. I think as I introduced earlier, since China is the wholesale market reform is still going on, it's still on the way, and the retail pricing reform is almost just started. It's very important for the demand response system to be connected to all this pricing mechanisms to send out the right signals to the users, which I'm sure will be very essential to attract more users and to expand the total scheme. Yeah, that's all from me. You're still muted.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Eugene, as well for your presentation, and to all our speakers today. I want to remind our audience to please share your questions using the Q&A function. We have seen a few coming in already. So we have them ready for the Q&A. Before we move on to the session on perspectives from new market actors and the future of policy, I will ask Tim to please launch our final question for today, the final poll question. The question is, who has the greatest potential to catalyze the mainstreaming of demand-side flexibility? And of course, we know that the actions from market and government and regulators need to go hand by hand, but if you were to choose one, which one would it be? So again, a few seconds to reply to the poll. You can see most of the responses probably have already come in, so maybe just about 10 seconds more. Yeah, I think maybe, Tim, that's enough. We can close the poll. Perfect. And we'll come back to this in a few minutes. I will now open the floor to our commentators. They are all experts representing key stakeholders and key pieces of the demand-side flexibility puzzle, and each one of them will have 2 to 3 minutes to do an intervention inspired obviously by the previous presentations, but also their own experiences with demand-side flexibility. The first 2 of our commentators represent a new market actor known as aggregators, a very important one, and I will hand over first to Pierre Vivas, founder and CEO of Voltalis, a leading European flexibility management operator that specializes in residential demand response and which currently reaches to over 100,000 homes. Welcome, Pierre.
Good morning to all, and congratulations for the presentations, which were very impressive. So I build on the comments that were made already. There is a huge potential from demand-side flexibility to contribute to climate policies, and most of that potential will come from small consumers, except, as George mentioned, I think consumers are not going to become traders and manage their appliances every minute or even every day to optimize the system. So what that means is you need automation. Appliances and homes need to become automated, but of course you can dream that in some decades every single electrical appliance will become remotely monitored, but that will take decades. So if you want to go quicker, you need to add some automation in homes in order to be able to monitor and control the loads that are flexible, such as heating, electric vehicles, and all those that have been mentioned already. So all the discussion is not about how to convince consumers, because they're very happy. Our experience shows that they're very happy to participate in something that is practical, that helps the energy transition, and it's not a problem for them to bring the flexibility to the market, provided they don't have to care about it. They just offer the flexibility for an aggregator to operate, and that's great. So the aggregator will invest in the automation. And why is that so? Because the benefits of automating demand-side flexibility is huge for the system, meaning ultimately for all consumers, and is fairly small for the one consumer who wants to participate. Okay, so if you expect consumers to invest themselves in automation without any specific incentive or whatever, just the benefit they will get from that, they won't do it. Okay, So if you want to have automation, you have to finance it because of the benefits brought to the overall system. And how can you do that? It's very easy. You simply have to pay to allow demand response to be paid by participating in all electricity markets, as David suggested previously. So this is where you have to emphasize the difference between implicit or price-driven, retail price-driven demand response. And thank you from Eugene for her presentation at the end. There's separating retail and wholesale. The key thing is you have benefits at wholesale level, at system level. So you need to have demand side participate at wholesale level in all wholesale markets, not in retail. And this is how you can get revenues for demand response to be paid and aggregators to invest in automation for consumers to participate free of charge and all consumers to benefit from that. That's how we see it. And that's how many countries are moving forward to demand response. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. Next, we have Yong-Mi Kim, Sales Director at NLX China, which is the NL's global business line and a global leading company on services like demand response, storage, and in the electric mobility sector. Over to you, Yong-Mi.
Thank you, Adriana. Hi, everyone, and all the speakers. Thank you for the presentation. I'm today representing NLX China. I don't know if many of you already know NLX. NLX is the leading DR aggregator. We actually manage 6 gigawatt flexible loads around the world, specifically in 15 countries. But we are very new in China. We just entered China over about a year and a half ago, and we are not acting as an aggregator yet in China. But today I would like to speak for my fellow Chinese aggregators. Actually, there are so many aggregators working in China, but today we talked about policies, technology, and market. Guy, in the very beginning of this webinar, mentioned that we need the right market design. I think that's something China needs most at the moment, especially for the aggregator. Aggregators' capabilities have been built up quite a lot for the past 7 years. When the Shanghai DR pilot launched in 2014, a lot of Chinese aggregators were eager to learn, and they have been building up their capacity. But the mechanism, how they get paid out of these DR projects is really, really harsh for them. So there is no exact mechanism for the aggregators to get paid out of their DR programs. So I would call what's most needed in China, it's not the policy or technology. I'm sure Chinese policies have been improving quite a lot for the past years, and technology-wise, you would be really astonished when you see all the platforms of Chinese aggregators. So what we really need in China to make the DR programs to take off is more about the market design and then specific mechanisms for the aggregators to make the business cases out of the DR programs. Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you, Yong-Mi. Last but not least, I'll pass it over to a commentator who represents another crucial actor in the demand-side flexibility universe, system operators. James Kellaway is the Energy Intelligence Manager of Strategy and Regulation at National Grid ESO, the electricity system operator here in Great Britain, and which has the ambitious target to run a zero carbon electricity system by 2025. So let's see if demand-side flexibility has a role to play here. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you to all the previous speakers and commentators. I've really enjoyed listening to the work that you've been doing and the comments you've made. From our side, we kind of take the helicopter view of how do we operate the HV network. The demand side is really, really crucial. It's absolutely important. We're moving from a world where we have a system that was legacy designed to have a small number of really large generators distributing power to a democratized world, as I think Guy said in his initial presentation, where you're actually getting lots and lots of generators sending power, almost like a nervous system in the human body across the different areas. We also have the decarbonisation challenge, and as a global community, it's part of a global community. It's great to see this being taken on, certainly with COP26 just around the corner. I'd like to share very quickly, if I may, Adriana, if you could kind of pop the slide up there, just the sort of the progress that we're making in the UK, just to give a little bit of context to what we're saying. So back in 2013, which is not that long ago, we were looking at an average of around 510 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Actually, we've taken a big decrease in that. We've nearly taken 2/3 out of the amount of carbon that goes into the atmosphere in GB. Yeah, and that's a record to be proud of, but actually we're not there yet, and it gets exponentially harder the closer you get to zero. The eagle eyes amongst you will notice that 2020 was lower than the current year to date. Yes, that's because of the COVID pandemic and lower demand. However, we have seen a real rise in renewables, and I agree with the point made by one of the speakers earlier that the electrification is the way we do this. And the way we take the carbon out of the system is to increase the level of renewables and the amount of flexibility required to run with them. Just for context, on the UK grid, we've got around about 23 gigawatts of installed capacity for wind, which yields a maximum of about 17, 18 gigawatts, and we've got about 13 gigawatts of solar, which, because of how far north we are, is currently yielding about max of about 9.7 gigs, somewhere around there. So we've got the renewables, but that then comes with its own challenges because they don't have huge rotational masses to help keep the frequency stable. So that's where the kind of the ancillary service or the demand side comes in, because you need really interesting products and actors that we haven't seen traditionally to really come forward and help us run that system in a stable way with that really high level of renewable penetration. As Adriana mentions, we've got ambitious goals. So our first goal is that by 2025, the power system will be able to run for, albeit a short period, with zero carbon generation. So no coal, no gas, no bio. Our more expensive goal, or more expanded goal, if you like, that the Prime Minister Johnson laid out last week, was that by 2035, actually, we'll be operating a zero carbon power grid. That's really hard, but it's a goal that we're running for now. The demand side stuff is really, really important because let's take solar as an example. We have the 13 gigawatts of solar installed in GB. However, most of that is actually connected to the distribution network. It's not something that we, as the operators of the main supergrid, if you like, actually control. So we see that as a net off of demand, effectively. So we have to model and understand that. Now, that can also be the case with home automation, with other aspects. And it's just a case of we have to get a greater understanding of that, share that understanding with all different actors, so we can continue to keep that decarbonisation coming. The only final point I'd like to make is on the consumer side. I agree consumers are not going to be expert traders every night. I certainly can't imagine my parents wanting to do that in their retirement. However, there is a really big role for them to play, and it also doesn't have to be an expensive role. Perhaps 30 or 40 pounds, $50, $60 will actually get you an automated setup that can turn on your immersion heater on and off based on a price signal or based on a carbon signal. So there are ways to achieve this stuff, and there are many innovative products out there. So to summarize, we are decarbonising. We are learning as we do that. We are sharing our learnings as well. Certainly a lot of the information we have is open data and open information, and we are absolutely certain that the demand side is a critical part to us achieving a zero carbon electricity and energy system. So with that, I'll hand back over to Adriana and say thank you very much for your time, and please, if you've got any questions, don't be shy.
Thank you all, our commentators, and thank you, James, also for your remarks. I would like now to invite all our panelists for today to turn on your cameras and your microphones for the Q&A session. I'm just going to close my curtain very quickly because there is a lot of sun coming in gladly here in the UK. I also want to invite our panelists to keep sharing your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And if your question is directed to a particular speaker, please indicate so in the question. We also hope this conversation is going to be interactive. It's going to be more of a dialogue instead of me asking questions to the panelists. So I want to also encourage the panelists here today to ask questions to each other, maybe if you disagree with something or you want to challenge, of course, respectfully, some of the ideas, or you want to learn more about them. And in the meantime, we'll kickstart the Q&A with one of the results from our poll. So Tim, can you please share the results from our first poll question? Yes, perfect. So we ask if consumers, electricity consumers, will ever be active enough for demand-side flexibility to drive the decarbonization of electricity. And as you can see, 74% of our attendees actually think this is not possible, or this won't be possible. And I want to know what you think. If you want to participate, raise your hand, but maybe in the meantime, I'm going to start with Youngmi, if I may.
Okay, I also think it's false. Customers will be active as long as they see the value in it. And again, I think the role of aggregators is critical in this aspect. The specialization of aggregators, what we do is to engage customers and then create the value of DR or any other flexible resources, right? So yeah, that's what I think.
Pierre?
Yes, I can add comments regarding smaller consumers than those who Kim was mentioning, and I agree with her in principle, but regarding small consumers, so citizens, people, they're very happy to participate if you provide them the solution. And I will react to what James mentioned. James mentioned that solutions exist, technology devices exist to make demand flexible, but the nuance I would like to introduce again is this is spending money. So some people will be happy, will be so fond of the climate and the planet that they would spend hundreds of euros to invest in such devices. Most of them won't. So if you want to have large scale demand side flexibility participation from small consumers, you have to have aggregators or suppliers invest in those automation devices, operate those devices to serve the system and get benefits for all consumers. And because they benefit all consumers, they should be rewarded for that. And this is the market design issue that Kim mentioned before. You must allow demand side flexibility to be paid in the wholesale level by participating in all electricity market. That's the solution. And so it's not on the hurdle, the barrier is not on consumer side. I agree with the poll saying, no, the problem is not on consumer side. Consumers are happy to participate. They'll see value or they'll be happy to contribute to the climate policies and so on. No, we just need to organize the market design in order to provide money for making this business work. Thanks.
Thank you, Pierre. James, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with what Youngmi and Pierre have just said in all. I mean, I think the thing is there's a lot of stuff that can be done here. So I actually agree with the poll answer for what it's worth as well. You know, are people actually going to take time out of their lives to do this stuff? No, they're not. But there are ways that technology could be integrated at the home so it's actually passive to the consumer. So if I take a very simplistic example, if you've got a washing machine and a dishwasher running at the same time, the big electrical loads for both of those machines are actually the heating elements for the water, typically. Those two things don't have to trigger at the same time if they know each other exists, to have no impact on the wash cycle efficiency, to have no impact on the consumer all the time. Yeah, it's kind of like, and it's absolutely right, because it's like having like a mini aggregator in your home. It's a mini aggregator across your devices. Yeah, so there is technology there that can do it. What's kind of absent at the moment is joining that all up, and what signals should that act upon. So hopefully that's something to build out in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. I would like now to maybe share the results from our third poll, because it links to a question we received on the chat. Can we share the results? Yes, perfect. And can you do full screen, please? Thank you. So we have this question of who has the greatest potential to catalyze the mainstreaming of demand-side flexibility between market actors and government actors and regulators. And for the comments on this question, I would like to start with Pierre, because we received a question from Jean-Michel Glachant, who says, what role you would give to government authorities and regulator to permit or help the takeoff of aggregation as leading form of demand-side flexibility. So Pierre, if you would like to start with this one, please go ahead, and then we can go with George.
Yes, well, you know, there are electricity markets where power plants can sell generally megawatt hours and sometimes also megawatts. And so should demand-side flexibility be allowed to do it. So that's the key thing. The key decision that must come from governments is to allow a megawatt hour or a megawatt from the demand side to compete with a megawatt hour or a megawatt from generation side on a level playing field, same conditions. And that will benefit all consumers by avoiding high prices and so on, and avoiding CO2 emissions. So that's a very simple decision, although maybe sometimes generators are not very happy with such competition from consumers. And maybe that's the thing I should emphasize. If there is somewhere someone slowing down things, it's all those companies who believe increasing the market power from consumers is maybe not so great for them because it means reducing their margin. Okay, so that's where the problem is. But if you want to change the overall power system, well, you have to change some things, even for powerful players. And in that case, we are getting, you know, in many webinars, we hear people saying it's not easy to engage consumers in all that thing. Well, it's very easy if you allow them. You just allow them to sell, of course, through aggregators, to sell demand-side flexibility in the market. They'll be happy to do so. And that's the one decision that you must allow.
Thank you, Pierre. I know George had his hand raised, so maybe George, if you want to go next.
Yeah, thanks, Adriana. And thanks everybody for really interesting presentations. And I think the poll results are really interesting. A good deal of optimism about the opportunity for the demand side to really play a key role, but recognition of the importance of government and regulators in getting the market right, which I think is really crucial here. You know, innovators like Pierre and so on have shown the power and of technology, but at the moment, even in some of the most you know, sophisticated electricity markets, the market signals and the prices are still not fully rewarding the value of flexibility, and there's still a long way to go in terms of market reform to really unlock the flexibility proposition. And we're talking about going into a different phase of decarbonisation of electricity systems, deep decarbonisation, where it's going to be critical to really push ahead with this. So I think that's a really interesting area to focus on. I thought Eugene's presentation was fascinating in terms of what's happening in China and the journey that China has to go on as well in terms of getting market signals going, and the demand side being viewed less as a punishment and actually something which empowers the demand side. So that's really interesting. But for me, this the importance of getting the market design right is and the price signals right is really key.
Thank you, George. I noticed James had his hand raised. Then we can continue with Pierre and then David.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the other one to add in this is to sort of from an operability angle to enable. So we're all about lowering barriers for market participants, consumer or otherwise. The thing to consider though is kind of like the congestion on the local network. So if you've got at a very simple level 2 batteries that are doing a bit of arbitrage trading, that's great, but they're just sending energy to each other, using up the capacity of the line, and actually that then stops that being used for other services. So we've got to be quite careful about that. You know, and that's where the role of the regulator and the policy comes in. You know, in whole, I'm in favour of it. You know, if I put my future hat on, actually, I see you know, green hydrogen electrolyzers, for example, being a perfect way on the demand side that actually we can vary that stuff, where we can get that peaking plant, where we can move that peaking load. You know, at a very simple level, if I've got a gas station or a petrol station that actually doesn't sell fossil fuels, it sells hydrogen. It may have an on-site electrolyzer. That doesn't have to be running flat out all the time. You could actually turn that down. You could actually turn that up depending on what the load is. You could actually turn that up and down very quickly and provide perhaps a frequency response product. So there are lots of ways that you could do this without actually impacting the congestion. But on the whole, I really welcome the consumer demand side stuff. Thank you very much.
Yes, I would like to build on what George said. What about the proper price signal to consumers to make them flexible? Well, first, I would say let's distinguish between the retail price and the wholesale price signals. We don't expect consumers to be very fond of variable retail prices. That would be rather the retailer's business to provide something safe enough for consumers. And the current situation with high volatility confirms that. The proper price signal you're looking for is at wholesale level, because this will reflect the overall system needs through the market price, meaning the wholesale market price. And this is why you need to have demand response participate in wholesale market, because it will reflect the overall needs and benefits for all consumers, not only the one participating. Again, if you expect price signals at retail level to incentivize consumers to participate, this means prices would be so high that it would be politically not sustainable. So don't expect to go that way. If you want large volumes of demand response, you have to get it involved at wholesale level, because that would reflect the benefits for wholesale, for the overall system, and so meaning the country and all consumers.
David, please go ahead, then Young-Mi, and then I think we'll move on to another question from our audience.
Well, I think this is for James, but perhaps others would like to answer too. And it has to do with the incentives for the system operator to actually, promote or support demand-side flexibility, or at least enable it to be competitive. I know that in the UK, the system operator is separated from the grid owner, and I'm curious, if you could explain the logic of that and how that, whether that's important, whether there are alternative ways to get, if you want the system operator to have incentives to enable demand-side flexibility, especially on the distribution network.
Well, are you happy for me to come straight back on that, Adriana?
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so just for a sort of a broad picture, because it's a really good question from David, actually. So the National Grid Electricity System Operator is actually a completely separate legal entity from asset owners and network operators. I think that's really important to probably state that and just put that out there. What does that mean? We don't actually own assets as such. We just literally operate the power grid, and we do essentially residual balancing for the solution that is supplied by the markets. Yeah. So what we also look at is what products need to be in those markets to help, with what we're doing. So I mentioned about renewable penetration earlier as an example, right? So as renewable penetration increases, the amount of synchronous generation, i.e. the big spinning kit, actually decreases, which means it'll wobble around a little bit more unless you do something, right? And if you want to get to zero carbon, it's going to wobble an awful lot unless you put a lot of products in. So we actually then have to think about how we actually do that market reform. And it's a very good question to raise. And what incentives we supply to consumers, to customers, to companies, to innovators, to say, actually, these are the products we want in the market and we need, yeah? And how we do that in an agile way, because the grids in many countries, the UK, China, and many other countries are actually growing and changing, evolving. They always have done. They always will continue to do so. It's what we need to do to make it work in that new way to deliver that zero carbon. And yeah, that's a question we grapple with daily and continually evolve. And I know certainly many of the thinkers on this call also do that on a daily basis. So does that answer or dodge your question?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I would like to now give the floor to Young-Mi.
Well, I was just gonna bring this up because we were talking about price signals and market design. Since this policy brief is supposed to provide recommendations to Chinese audience, I would like to bring up this issue. what I meant by there is no market mechanism for aggregators to make business cases out of DR. In many places in China, actually, the DR payments are in form of deduction from the electricity bill of the end user. So there is no way for the aggregators to take any money out of it in the middle. So when you recommend any market design or business models for the Chinese market, you really need to take this into consideration. Under the current mechanism with the state grid and everybody in China, it is really, really hard to make the process, the payments for to the aggregator in between the end user and the grid operator or utility companies in China.
Great comment, Yeonmi, and I think that also helps us to jump into the question that we are going to move on to next from Jie Haijuan. He says, or she says, apologies, I am not very familiar with Chinese names. It's a he, thank you. So he asks, China's recent coal power pricing reform and full deregulation of all industry and commerce customers as a quick response to ongoing power system crunch will certainly release the potential of demand-side flexibility, if equipped with proper ICT technologies, aggregation, and business model. So the actual question is, I wonder if there is mature enabling platform in the UK to deploy small customers. And maybe we can relate also to the Chinese market when we respond to this question. So I'm going to start with Eugene.
Well, I think the question is actually asking whether there's the platform in the UK, right? But I can answer from the Chinese perspective that, I think right now we don't really have much of those platforms. Number one is the involvement of smaller users is still very limited. They are only in a very early piloting stage in some of the more developed provinces. And the second thing is, and actually this is also my question to all the panelists here, right now what I'm seeing in China is that a lot of such platforms are being developed by startups, focusing on bringing the technology. But I'm just wondering, in your market, so let me just finish on answering the question. So yeah, in China, we don't really have, at least I don't think we have those kind of platforms that are being maturely developed. And actually my follow-up question to the panelists would be, what are the aggregators? Like who would be the best aggregators in your market? Are they tech companies? Are they retail companies? Are they system operators themselves? Like who are they? And why are they doing good? Yeah.
Can I respond to that question? First, let me introduce those aggregators outside China. And Alexa, as I said, is the leading aggregator around the world. Yeah. We are like tech company. We have very advanced aggregation platform. So I would say it's more like a tech company, and we do all the optimization, aggregation happening on our platform is worldwide, except China. And on your comment about Chinese aggregators platform, I can be sure that there are several Chinese aggregators. Their platforms have been developed really well recently. They started to learn from like NLX. Before NLX, it was Innernog and all other aggregators. They learned a lot with those companies in the beginning, and then they built up their capacity really fast. Even though I cannot say that they are the world leading level, but you will be very surprised about their capability. Their platforms are really fancy and working well. And then there is this issue that, so we have a lot of platforms of Chinese aggregators, and they have to integrate into the system operator. Like like state grid, right? So there are some communications, protocol issues, and data, a lot of issues in between. But when we look at all the Chinese aggregators platforms, I mean those good ones in China, is quite advanced.
Go ahead, Pierre. I noticed you raised your hand first.
Yes, well, I do agree that totally with Kim that we need to develop some software and platform. And indeed, we have a significantly different platform from NNOC, as we are operating the largest number of consumers, and everyone is small rather than the largest number of gigawatts. And the technology is slightly different. And again, you have many startups operating pilots on 10 or 100 homes, which is technologically speaking very different from 10,000 or 100,000 or 1 million appliances as we operate. So technology is a challenge, but many companies are able to go that way. However, that's only part of the thing. The second part is operational knowledge. So it's nice to have a pilot on 100 or 1,000 homes, but it's very different to operate in the market, as NNOC has been doing, and Alex now, and Voltalis is doing. And we've been operating for now years in several markets. And that's also a different know-how to be able to be a market operator, not only a technology provider. And then the third thing is about rolling out. So reaching out to consumers and proposing the solution and installing the solution. So maybe reaching out to consumers, retailers can do it, electricity retailers, because they have consumers, but maybe they do not have the solution, the technology, and they do not have this know-how about installing devices at homes. So we can be in partnerships with such companies. We as Voltalis already have partnerships, for instance, with electricity suppliers who do not have that solution, but rely on the platform, on our platform in that case. To summarize, developing demand-side flexibility on a large scale is not only a technology issue, it's also operational. It's also getting to know new markets and new business. And there is a learning curve probably. However, companies can be very quick in doing so, maybe quicker than governments are.
Thank you, Pierre. The conversation is really interesting. We are approaching now the end of the webinar, so I'm going to allow James and David a quick comment regarding this question. Then I'm going to ask one more, and then the final question of the event. So please try to keep your answers concrete, so we can cover a little bit more before we finish. David, go ahead. Sorry, James, and then David, go ahead.
Sure. So just sort of 2 bits of context, which I think can help inform that last question. So if I look from the larger player end of the market for a second, there are reforms going in around wider access. So we have a balancing mechanism in the UK, and we're working sort of, also that's within Europe as well, you know, to actually reduce that down to participants of maybe a megawatt size rather than tens of megawatts. That opens that market up to many aggregators that would certainly have been prohibited before. The other point I'd like to make is that also we're seeing the more advanced energy companies, the people who actually resell to customers, becoming more and more agile. So if you look at companies such as Octopus, you know, they have fully agile tariffs where they work on price signals at quite high frequency, and that integrates with home batteries and home storage, and also with vehicle to grid as a service to start lowering costs and carbon. So we're seeing it from kind of both ends in the UK. Would I say it's whole system linked up? I'd have to say no, not at the moment. But actually, we are seeing some real trends there. So with that, I'll pause and hand over to David.
I just wanted to raise the issue of that Pierre mentioned, to do with if you want a conflict between independent aggregators who have no other, if you have no generation assets, and companies which are maybe have the potential to be aggregators, they may be supply or system operators, but they also have generation assets. To the extent that generation is competing with demand side flexibility, there's always a tension there. And I think it's important for us to understand that regulation, market design has to be such that we limit that and ensure that independent aggregators are actually able to compete.
Thank you, David. I think I'm going to jump straight into our final question because of time. So I'm going to ask all the panelists to respond in 30 seconds or at least less than 1 minute. If you were to choose only one, what would you say is the key and most urgent priority for governments to be looking at in order to unlock the full potential of demand-side flexibility? And I'm gonna start maybe with James. And you can pass over the word to another speaker you can choose.
So unlocking the flexibility, I think it's going to be market access. It's around about removing barriers to actually operating in the system, which has traditionally been designed and dominated to work for very large power stations, and it's how to get that much more flexible, much more agile, and to work with aggregators that can work with really distributed asset sets, but in a controlled way so that the system can still be completely stable and operable in a zero carbon world. And with that, who'd like to go next? Go for it.
I can go next. I think my answer would be simple for in the China's context. I think number one is stop selling them the cheap power, because the power prices, especially for commercial and industrial users in China, they are very low. One of the reasons behind the power shortage last month is that actually not because of the shortage of power, like coal supply or power supply. It's because the coal is so expensive, but the power producers cannot pass that cost to the consumers, so they don't want to do it. So I mean, if we can increase or maybe not increase, just let the market to decide the prices, then yeah, I think they will have much more incentives to participate.
Can I go next? So I'm going to cheat and say I've got two priorities. First one is market reforms that get wholesale price signals that are much more granular and accurate, real-time reflection of the physics of the electricity system. We've got a long way to go on that. Second priority is reforms of the mechanisms that are used to support renewable generation and investment in renewable generation, so that investors have more incentive to invest in the natural complements to renewables, which is flexibility.
Maybe Yomi?
Okay, I would also pick market design, but in a different aspect. I would say we really need to define the costs and benefits of whatever we do, a DR or renewable energy integration. So costs and benefits, we have to be very clear about it. And then everyone, the stakeholders, we need to agree on how to share the costs and benefits.
Here and then David to close the panel.
Yeah, so well, I would agree with what Young-Mi Kim just said and George and James said in the first place. Market access is the key thing. And what does it mean? It's not so much about increasing retail prices, which is a different subject about energy savings. It's basically allow 1 megawatt-hour of demand response, demand curtailment, to be sold in the wholesale market at, for example, day-ahead market at the same price as 1 megawatt-hour of generation, and have this competition run. Thank you.
Okay, two. One is that market design encourage demand to match the timing of renewable generation in order to minimize the need to rely on the rest of the system. But the second one, and for me the most important, is to understand consumer preferences, to understand what characteristics of an offering will attract consumers to participate. And I think that requires research, understanding more about what consumer preferences are, not only to help design the offering, but also to help design public policy.
Thank you, David. So to recap, we're talking about government priorities in terms of market access, allow the market to define prices, market reforms, market design that states clear costs and benefits and how they are shared, and also further research to understand consumer preferences and the right incentives for those consumers to be able and encouraged to participate. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I also want to thank our speakers and panelists for participating in this really relevant and interesting conversation. As I mentioned, this is the conclusion of our first project on demand-side flexibility, but we hope there will be more to come, because if there was one key takeaway message from the event is that the opportunity of demand-side flexibility for both electricity decarbonization and business development globally has just started to be tapped on. So definitely keep an eye out for our upcoming policy brief and for future news on the topic. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.